It is 4 in the morning in the dead of winter, and a railroad engineer climbs into the cab of a locomotive that has sat untouched in the yard for hours. No crew has been aboard, and yet the machine is running and has been the whole time, the big diesel turning over in the freezing dark, burning fuel, going nowhere. This is not a mistake. Across the continent, on any given night, thousands of locomotives sit motionless on sidings and in yards with their engines running for hours on end. A single idling locomotive drinks 3 to 4 gallons of diesel an hour, the largest road units far more, all to move the train 0 feet. Here is the strange part. The companies that own these machines are ruthless about cost, an industry that has spent a century shaving fractions of a cent off the price of moving a ton of freight a mile. Airlines shut down at the gate. Truckers get fined for idling. So why does the freight railroad deliberately leave its most expensive equipment burning fuel to do nothing? The answer isn't laziness, and it isn't waste for its own sake. It's a compromise more than 100 years in the making, built out of frozen water, compressed air, thickened oil, and a very old habit the industry has never quite shaken. To understand why a diesel locomotive is almost always on, you have to start with the machine it replaced. For most of railroad history, the engine at the front of a train was a fire-breathing steam locomotive, and you did not simply switch one off at the end of a shift. It kept a fire burning around the clock. Let that fire die and the boiler cooled, the pressure bled away, and reviving it could swallow the better part of a day. So crews learned to bank the fire instead, holding a low bed of coals through the night so the machine was never truly cold. A locomotive was a living thing, and you kept it alive. When diesels swept the old engines aside after the Second World War, they were supposed to end all of that, and mostly they did. A diesel started with the turn of a key instead of hours of shoveling. It needed no water stop every 100 miles, no army of machinists to nurse it through the night. But the old instinct survived. The men who ran the new machines had spent their lives believing a locomotive was something you kept running, and the diesel, for reasons entirely its own, mostly agreed. A modern freight diesel does not want to be shut off in the cold. That reluctance comes down to 3 separate problems, and all 3 arrive at once the moment you reach for the switch. The first hides inside the engine block, and it sounds like a mistake until you understand it. The coolant flowing through a big North American locomotive engine is, for the most part, just water. Plain water, treated with a little something to hold off corrosion, but water all the same. Not the bright antifreeze that protects the engine in your car. At first, that seems backwards. Why would a railroad running through Montana in January choose plain water? The answer is partly heat, partly scale. Water pulls warmth away from hot metal better than any glycol blend, and these engines produce a staggering amount of it. A single cooling system can hold several hundred gallons, and filling that with antifreeze over and over, every time it's flushed, would cost a fortune across a fleet of thousands. Water is nearly free. It does no harm when a hose lets go onto the ballast, and the engines were built around water, with seals that don't take kindly to glycol. So, water won. But it has one unforgivable habit. It freezes. And when a few hundred gallons of it freeze solid inside the narrow passages of a cast iron block, the ice expands with a slow, irresistible force that splits the metal open. A cracked block is not a quick repair. It can pull a locomotive out of service for weeks and cost a small fortune. So the rule writes itself. Let the temperature fall toward freezing, and the engine stays on. In the deep cold of the northern plains, crews don't even leave it idling gently. They set it to run harder, burning still more fuel because an engine barely ticking over can't make enough heat to keep itself from freezing. The only alternative is to drain the whole cooling system every time and refill it before the next crew arrives. Nobody does that. They keep it running. Suppose you solved the freezing problem. You still wouldn't want to shut the engine down because waking it back up is its own ordeal. And here, the sheer size of the thing starts to matter. The diesel in a freight locomotive has almost nothing in common with the engine in a pickup truck. It's closer to something bolted into the hull of a ship. A common design carries 16 cylinders, each displacing around 10 liters, more than a big pickup's whole engine times 16. These engines have no spark plugs. They rely on compression alone, squeezing the air in each cylinder until it grows hot enough to light the fuel. When the engine is warm, this works beautifully. When it's stone cold, everything conspires against it. The lubricating oil thickens towards syrup, and the massive pistons drag against it. The starting batteries, already weakened by the cold, must fight that resistance at the moment they're least able to. And even if the engine turns over, the frigid cylinder walls can steal so much heat that the compressed air never reaches the temperature it needs to fire. The engine cranks and won't catch. And when a cold locomotive finally does start, it can't just go to work. It has to warm through slowly over 10 or 20 minutes so the rush of heat doesn't crack a cylinder liner or warp something deep inside. Depending on conditions, it can be close to an hour before a cold engine will pull with everything it has. For a railroad that needs a locomotive rolling within minutes of a crew signing on, an hour of warming is an hour it doesn't have. So the switch stays put. The third problem has nothing to do with temperature at all, and it's the one that catches people most off guard because it isn't about the engine keeping itself alive. It's about the brakes keeping the train still. Every freight train on the continent stops using air. A single pipe runs the whole length of the train, feeding compressed air to the brakes on every wheel. The source is a compressor on the locomotive, driven directly by the diesel engine. While the engine runs, the compressor keeps the system charged. Shut the engine down, and the compressor stops with it. Now here is the detail almost nobody expects. Every one of those air systems leaks constantly and by design. 100-car train means 100 cars worth of couplings, hoses, valves, and fittings, each letting a little air slip away. That faint, steady hiss near a parked train is exactly this: air bleeding out of the brake line. The rules don't demand it stop, only that it stay slow. As long as the engine runs and the compressor cycles, the lost air is replaced as fast as it escapes, and the brakes stay sharp. But cut the engine, the leaking continues while the replenishing stops, and the pressure falls. And the federal rules are unforgiving about what comes next. Let a train sit without a live air source for more than about 4 hours, and the brake test that certified it expires. Before it can move again, a crew must run the full inspection from scratch, walking the entire consist on foot to confirm the brakes on every car set and release. On a train well over a mile long, that walk alone can eat up more than an hour. This is no rare edge case. Trains sit all the time, waiting for a crew to change, a signal to clear, the track ahead to open. Every time a locomotive shuts down with a train behind it, a clock starts ticking toward a mandatory retest that ties up a crew and jams the whole schedule. Put the three side by side, and it snaps into focus. Shutting a locomotive down risks a cracked block in winter, costs an hour of warm-up you can't spare, and can trigger a brake inspection that strands a crew and delays every train behind it. So decades ago, the railroads ran the arithmetic, and it wasn't close. The fuel burned idling, real money though it is, came out cheaper than the labor, the delays, and the cascading mess of shutting down and starting up again. Idling wasn't carelessness. It was the rational answer to a stubborn problem, and for most of the diesel era, it was simply correct. If you are the kind of person who likes knowing why the machines around you behave the way they do, take a second to subscribe. We dig into the history and the engineering of the railroads every week, but arithmetic does not stay still. The numbers that made idling the obvious choice have been drifting for years, and the pressure is coming from several directions at once. Diesel has grown more expensive and more volatile, and the waste is not small once you add it up. A single large railroad burns hundreds of millions of gallons a year, and the share lost to engines idling when they could safely have been off can climb past 20 million gallons annually, roughly 4 cents of every fuel dollar spent to move nothing. Narrow it to the small switchers that shuffle cars around yards, which idle away more than half their working lives, and by one federal estimate, those alone burn some 60 million gallons a year, going nowhere. Then there are the neighbors. Rail yards sit inside cities and towns, and the people beside them have spent years complaining about noise and exhaust that never stops at 2 in the morning. Regulators have tightened locomotive emission standards year over year until burning fuel to sit still became not just an expense, but a liability. So the industry went looking for a way out. No single clean solution appeared, only partial ones, each attacking the problem from a different side. The first was to teach the locomotive to shut itself down, and, just as important, to wake itself back up. These automatic stop-start systems watch what matters: coolant and oil temperature, battery charge, brake pressure, the cold outside. When every reading sits safely in range, the system quietly kills the engine. When anyone drifts toward trouble, it restarts on its own, no crew required. In mild weather, in a temperate yard, this can have a locomotive's idle time. But ask it to work through January on the northern prairie and its limits show. When the cold runs deep enough, the coolant sheds heat so fast that the system restarts the engine again and again, and the fuel it saves shrinks toward nothing. Below a certain brutal threshold, many are simply told never to shut the engine off at all, because a cold engine that won't restart is worse than the fuel it might save. The second answer was to give the big engine a tiny helper. An auxiliary power unit is a small diesel, a fraction the size of the main engine, tucked into the locomotive to handle the overnight housekeeping. When the main engine shuts down, this little one takes over. It keeps the batteries charged, circulates warm coolant through the main block so the water never freezes, and runs a small compressor to hold pressure in the brake line, all while sipping well under a gallon an hour against the several the main engine would have swallowed idling. These warming units have paid for themselves in as little as 1 to 3 winters. Some railroads go further still, plugging parked locomotives into electric shore power in the yard, keeping the engine warm and the systems alive without burning a drop of diesel. And yet, for all of that, the engines keep running more than the numbers say they should. The last obstacle isn't mechanical at all. It's human. Put yourself in the boots of an engineer who has spent 30 years living by one iron rule: you never shut a locomotive down. Now someone bolts an automatic system to that machine and tells you to trust it through the coldest night of the year. If it works, you save a little fuel. If it fails, if the helper engine quits at 3 in the morning and the main engine slides into the cold, you arrive at dawn to a dead locomotive, a train that cannot move, and a dispatcher on the radio asking why your freight is still parked. More than one crew has quietly switched off the automatic system and let the engine idle the old way, taking the wasted fuel as the price of a good night's certainty. It's hard to blame them. The old habit never once produced that call at dawn. When your livelihood depends on a machine being ready the instant you need it, keeping it awake stops being about fuel at all. It's about trust. And trust is the slowest thing in the world to earn. Still, the ground really is shifting, even if the pace is not. Battery-powered locomotives already work in yards and on short local runs, where the endless stopping and starting suits them and there's no cold giant to coax awake. Hydrogen is being explored for longer hauls, where batteries grow too heavy to make sense. And the systems that manage a train's energy have grown clever enough to find savings not only in how it hauls freight, but in how it waits. The diesel isn't going anywhere soon. Thousands are still in service, machines built to run for 40 years or more, and plenty of the workhorses that first rolled out in the 1970s are still pulling trains today, their engines rebuilt and their frames showing no interest in retirement. For years to come, the sound of the rail yard at night will still be a diesel turning over in the dark. But the era of leaving it running simply because that's how it has always been done is fading. Not because anyone suddenly noticed the waste, the railroads always knew, but because the alternatives have finally grown reliable enough and cheap enough to bend the arithmetic that kept those engines awake for 100 years. So the next time you're near a rail yard after dark and you hear that low, endless rumble of engines running with no train in sight, listen a little differently. That sound isn't a company being wasteful or a crew being lazy. It's the sound of an old argument between physics and money, between habit and change, one the railroads have been having with themselves since the last steam fire went cold. Every idling engine out there is a decision, made and remade 1,000 times a night, to keep a machine alive rather than gamble on the cost of waking it. For 100 years, keeping it running was the right answer. Only now, slowly, is it starting to become the wrong one.